can startups and players in the clean tech ecosystem in Africa be supported to collaborate and form partnerships to benefit from carbon markets?
Okay. So the more I think about this question, the more the phrase innovation pops into my head. Like, and let me just share a bit of what we do and my startup, Vector Energy. So we manufacture solar portable power stations for different target audiences. So the portable stations can act as the solar microgrid, as opposed to just solar lamps for rural populations, or a remote worker. So basically, they're like expandable up to 2 kilowatts hour, and even up to like 10 kilowatt hour, depending on the kind of system you purchase. So what we intend to do is to actually replace small petrol generators, right? So there is a CDM for that, decentralized solar. I can't quite remember at the top of my head, but there's a methodology for that. And what we do is that, because it is an acceptable methodology, you having to replace small petrol generators with a portable station, you are saving your carbon footprint, typically CO2 equivalent, right? And we take that CO2 equivalent, right, and we convert it to credits through verification. Now, when it's verified, the credit is sold in voluntary markets and then transferred. The money's generated is transferred back to the user. And the way that we do it is we actually I intend on charging a commission for every sale of carbon credit that is returned back to the user, because we're a small project developer. But oftentimes, the conventional thing to do is to just keep the money. But we understand that if people, because I feel like the collaboration and partners is not just between entrepreneurs or between startups, but a major player is actually your customer, the beneficiary, your client, right? So if you can make clean tech, or the transition to clean tech, easier for them, more accessible, more affordable, because a lot of people still complain that the capex expenditure for solar is not so affordable. But with having to monetize this climate impact, the carbon credit, and giving it back to them, either they use it to supplement their installment payment, or they use it to augment other bills, such as data, or just cash it out in local currency. This way, we are monetizing that climate impact, and it speaks to affordability. And as a startup, engaging with other players, say like venture capitalists or donors or funders, right? Startups are not put in a very, very compromising situation to want to, raise funding, because they want to quickly, drive. The monies can essentially come from, their customers using the stations, and then the stations generating carbon credits and then using it to finance the entirety, right? And by selling carbon credits, you are not just enabling project developers or energy providers to just show up their revenue. You also help them to kind of like expand their product offerings. They're able to serve the people better, and they're able to like incentivize them while doing it, which is really important, because I've worked with several target audiences, ranging from people that don't have access to electricity to people that generate their own electricity, and lectures is not always enough. They understand that this is the right thing to do. It's affecting them. It has affected them for ages. Noise pollution, air pollution. Even the government banned petrol generators in 2015, right? But there are still, you know, um, huge sales of petrol generators and it doesn't even match up to what solar is currently selling, right? So the lectures is not just enough, but the behavioral need for that transition relies heavily on, incentivization and that affordability. How are you able to compete with small petrol generators? How are you able to, and, carbon credits offers, a huge opportunity. And a lot of players in the sense that, Africa in itself might not have the necessary skills, and that doesn't mean that we have to start from the grass, but like the bottom, right? We can leverage what other countries, other continents have done. I think with the ETS, right, for European countries, I think more recently, China partnered with the EU to develop their own trading scheme, right? And you know that would actually benefit startups, players in the clean tech in China, right? So they've started trading, right? If we could see the same thing happen in Africa, maybe AU ETS, right? Where, there is like some sort of transfer of knowledge to enable, to help us, develop our carbon market. And that's the collaboration and partnerships, Then I think Rwanda too as well is partnering with Sweden. So it doesn't necessarily have to be, continents, can be country to country, a global north country giving to a global south country, not necessarily aid. There's an adage that says, teach a man to fish, not exactly giving fish. So that's like the context we're riding on. Show us how to do it so we can do it for ourselves and locally build the solutions that can be accepted within our country and within our continent. Back to my story with Vector Energy, when we wanted to actually leverage carbon credits for what we were doing, we found that because the skills and knowledge wasn't present in Africa, which we mentioned that we do not have an inventory. Absolutely, we do not have an inventory, right? And it was really difficult for us to, verification process. It was so cumbersome. People were just, saying all sorts and all of that. Then we actually got an headway when we found out that it was too expensive for a startup like us, which would typically be the same narrative for other clean tech startups that, want to engage in this kind of venture. So after trying so many things, we realized that there are several players within the sector. For example, Solstrom, right? Solstrom actually does the entire verification. Then you can sell your savings to them, right? So that kind of like saves you from having to, do any of that verification. You just sell the savings to them and they will verify them. So like sub verification, and then you can just focus on building your startup and all that. So these are the, type of collaborations and, partnerships that could potentially help small project developers, of course. Just to add on what has been said, maybe, speaking from a person with lived experience rather, and someone that, I've in a small scale seen how carbon credits can help to solve so many financial challenges, typically just finance our transition, right? I believe carbon credits has a lot of promise. Don't let what has been said or propagated earlier kind of like prevent us from doing the right thing. I also want to reiterate that carbon credit is not a long-term solution. It's a short-term solution that helps us to hasten our transition towards 2030. And because it is a tool with so much promise, it can liberate Africa from aid, from dependency, to develop infrastructure, superstructure for sustainable industrialization. I think Rotimi mentioned how we need infrastructure, right, to be able to deliver, sustainable development.
Hi, Deborah. I think we lost you for a bit.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear
Sorry,
you now.
my network is a bit, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hello? Okay, my network is a bit shady. So like I was saying, Africa needs to move from dependency to a place of sufficiency, and carbon credits offers that, that independence. We emit the lists, and that puts us in a very strategic position to not beg, because Akiwumi additional wonders from begging, right? During the last, I think COP26 rather, when he was talking about, Africa being a strategic continent to essentially take care of itself with, carbon credits. And it's so important because if we need 40 billion every year annually till 2030 to be able to provide, or to be able to transition to, provide energy access and transition, then there is no aid that can provide that. In fact, we haven't seen a decline in ODAs and international finance flows. I think it was less than 4 billion as at 2022. So we have to find a very strategic way to bring that finance. Everybody is involved, entrepreneurs, governments, everybody's hands needs to be on deck, right? And because Africa should not and cannot beg for climate aid, we can propose this carbon credit, stabilize the carbon tax, right? Stabilize the carbon pricing, and ask every entity in the global north, whether governments, whoever has contributed to this catastrophe, to pay for it. And then we use that money to develop Africa.
Thank you.
And this
so
is
much.
where, okay, sorry.
Sorry, Deborah. Yeah, so I'd give you an opportunity to, share. I know you have so many things to say with regards to how capitalizing on the carbon market in Africa has the capacity to help us come out of our deficit in terms of finances. And I'd give you an opportunity to, share that much later during the course of the webinar. I'll just quickly, because we have like 2 questions to go, then we can open the floor for the audience to ask their question. Yes. So I'll go on to ask this. Monica, please confirm that you're still on the call. While we confirm from her, I'll just ask Rotimi, how can we ensure that, how can we ensure that carbon offsets are localized and do not reproduce colonial patterns? I'll direct the question to Monica.
All right, thank you very much. And I was listening to Deborah. That was some very good and passionate position. And Africa should not have to beg. And I also want to highlight some of the key things that John said, as how construction contributes to emissions. And I think we really do not give much recognition to how advanced Nigeria is in terms of the carbon market or preparation for the carbon market, especially when you compare Nigeria to a lot of countries in the sub-Saharan African region, in fact, Africa as a whole. So many do not know that, one of the key achievements Nigeria has is floating the green bond. The government floating of the green bond, which, for example, Kenya that is seen as such a major forerunner in climate financing, is just working on now. I'm happy to see Olumide, an old face. So Nigeria is really, and also, of course, a signatory to all the agreements of the UNFCCC. And Nigeria has inventories of our emissions. So we have something called the biannual report. So every 2 years, Nigeria releases an inventory of all their greenhouse gas emissions, where they are in terms of what is being polluted. It's true that Nigeria needs to really have a proper tracking of the largest industries, and this is not very hard to compile. So if Nigeria was ready to start an emission trading scheme, which it has made provisions for in the Climate Change Act, working with the Ministry of Trade to set up an emission trading scheme, provisions for this are actually in the Climate Change Act. And also coming up with a carbon tax, provisions for these are also in the Climate Change Act. So there's need for a lot of dialogue between the public sector on what they are doing and the private sector, startups that are really ready to take some of this information and help to meet the national goals, because Nigeria is doing a lot. But I think many of these things are kept close to the chest of the Ministry of Environment, and perhaps many CSOs and startups and other players in the private sector are not fully aware of what the government is doing. Now, to the question you asked, which is how can we make sure that what we are doing in the carbon market does not, look like the colonial patterns. Now, I'm thinking that this concerns making sure that Nigeria is not, Nigeria and other African countries are not exploited. I think we've already established that what we have now is a voluntary market. So a voluntary market, you as the person who is selling, you really don't have a lot of power or weight, because you're just happy to sell what you have to sell. So what we would like to see is a strong push for carbon, for purchase of our carbon credit. If there was high demand for purchase of our carbon credit, due to the forces of demand and supply, we'll be getting more money from our climate finance. But now what we see is more of a voluntary market, because in the European Union, for example, they are also trying to make sure that permits to emit have a certain amount of, it comes with a certain amount of cost. They don't want to crash their market too. So there are a lot of strategies that geography states to make sure that they are able to, convince industries to really cut down their emissions. So for the case of Nigeria, for the case of Africa, the market that the ACMI is working on is a good point, which I mentioned earlier. But if we wanted to make sure that local communities indeed get the most of the credits they are selling, in the absence of where we have a strong demand for this credit, I would like to suggest some innovation. I was really happy what Deborah was saying, but let me put some ideas to this, to the framework. Definitely, there are a lot of startups like Deborah's company that are generating carbon offsets that could be form of credit. Maybe some of them are hoping to get more from it, more from what they are saving, more of the carbon they are saving. In a situation where Nigeria, having developed the Climate Change Act, having made provisions for an emission trading scheme, is able to manage the forces of demand and supply. As we know in economics, when there's an oversupply or low demand of a certain commodity, the price crashes. When the price is low, very few people are interested in supplying in their market. So now the government could decide to manage the forces of demand and supply. And what would this look like? I am postulating, okay, this is just an idea when I got that question, still working on the topic, but having something called a carbon bond. This is an example. So we know that companies and governments issue bonds, infrastructure bonds, green bonds, sustainability bonds. What happens is that different people subscribe to those bonds. That means they transfer money to the government or to the company. Now the government or company is able to build an infrastructure. And in 10 years or 12 years or whenever the bond matures, the the person who bought that bond is able to get some funds. Now I'm wondering, in a situation whereby startups or developers come together and decide that, okay, we are going to generate offsets. Now we can sell these offsets to the voluntary market, but we have a competent authority that is a bulk buyer of our offsets. And this goes into a carbon bond, which in 10 years, we get the coupon of our bond. Now, I'm just saying that many of coupon is that you get the money that you're supposed to get after the bond matures. If we have something like that, then the project developer is able to either give their credit, their offset to this government institution, or they give it to the voluntary market. But what I would like to see is a situation whereby, like South Africa has done, Nigeria is able to use this carbon offset to increase her own carbon budget. As we know, there's coming to a time where regulations, international trade will be regulated through environmental instruments. There's something called the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. What this means is that products coming from maybe developing countries that want to go to Europe will check the carbon intensity of that product. And if it's too high, they will put a tax. So what that does is to discourage products from those countries. So Nigeria needs to increase our emission budget. And how to do that is to incentivize local companies in Nigeria to use cleaner technologies so that we can increase our budget. And when that budget is increased, we can attract industries. These are industries that are hard to mitigate industries. When they come in, we use the available credit to cut down their emission profile. I'm sorry if what I'm saying is very technical. I know that this is supposed to be an awareness raising workshop. I know some people here are, also learning the subject, but I'm happy to write down this in a very simple essay and send to Venture Park, which you can share with people here. But these are some of the ideas to manage the forces of demand and supply. And for me, this is only how our carbon offset can really work for us. We have to manage demand and supply. Otherwise, the price will just, will not be attractive enough to encourage investment. And there's also something called opportunity cost. In economics, what this means is that if, for example, you want to implement renewable energy projects, or let's say you want to keep your forest standing, that's an easier one. So what is the cost of developing a school or hospital in that locality instead of keeping the carbon standing? So maybe at the end of the day, you might have gotten $2,000 for keeping your forest standing. But if you had built a school, a hospital, or an industry, you may have made $1 million. This is just an example. So you always have to weigh these two things to decide what's the best course of action. So as I said, it might be too technical. I'll be happy to simplify it in an essay. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Monica. And we're very open to receiving the essay from you so that we can share to participants of the webinar, so that they can. I see a lot of people already saying thank you, awesome insights, and they would love to read the, cumulative documents when you send it. All right. UNDP is helping countries access carbon finance as a means to reduce deforestation through the REDD+ process. That's REDD is reducing emissions from deforestation and forest degradation process. What are the opportunities for players in innovation through this initiative? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. That's a very big question because I don't work with the UN. I'm just on the steering committee as, just the privilege for me to select projects to be funded in the UN. But interestingly, I would say I'm saying this based on my experience for the past. I think I've been on the steering committee for the past 4 years now, and I can tell you all that all this issue of carbon credits conversation, I've not really been, we've not really captured them in our selection process. Why? Because the country itself is actually, you know, still getting its grant. I remember some weeks, or let me say last month, when they had this meeting for private sector, talking about carbon credits, even in the area of energy transition. And it's very interesting to me that the private sector actually have a lot of work to do when it comes to, you know, carbon credit issue and stuff. And even entrepreneurs that are working as, let me call them a startup, because any startup in Nigeria now it looks as if startup itself is looking for money than the person in the market itself. So for the small grant program, let me just put a very good example. What the small grant program actually does is a grant from $20,000 to $50,000, and is specifically focusing on environmental problems in the country. But the point here is, 2 years ago, I think 2020, some of us came up to say that it's not going to make any sense why UNDP is giving money to non-profit organizations alone. And it was, you know, deliberated on in during COP. And behold, they've started giving this small grant to entrepreneurs. So if you have a project that is, I think the last one they gave out was majorly for people into recycling space. And now we are talking about energy, and which is one of the focal area that the UNDP is looking at. And why are they actually doing this? I just want to quickly bring to our understanding that, number one, Nigeria as a country, we've not really tapped into the carbon market that we see as a change, you know, a game changer for like African continent. With these vast, you know, natural resources we actually have, so Nigeria have a potential to actually unlock, you know, the big economic value and also drive a sustainable, you know, industrialization, even economic transformation and diversification. But, you know, because of, should I put it as political will, or because of even the leaders are not even getting their stand when it comes to environmental issues, or even making policies. You can see the Climate Change Act. Can we even, you know, point out where we can, you know, strategically pick the issue of carbon market, carbon credit in those content, before we now say that UNDP himself giving grant to the country to also capture that in their selection process? But, you know, working together, you know, actually, we actually make us to understand that this will be possible. So when it comes to, you know, also evaluating the efficacy of carbon credit, you know, we also need to a crucial consideration is also very, very important. You know, there's people that say additionality. I've been hearing that everywhere. But the point here is, can Africa itself, with the sort or kind of leaders that we are looking at, my sister here, Monica, mentions, or somebody mentioned something about climate finance. If you look at it very well, they keep telling us that we don't have the capacity to access financing. And I can tell you there's a lot of mechanisms, a lot of finance that is available in the, you know, in the space now. But the issue is they keep saying that we don't have capacity. And the reason why is because most of our leaders, we don't focus on the issue that is affecting the country or the continent when we get to the global stage. And it has shown to us that, you know, the issue of emission reduction or removal of, or considering the additionality is something that only the project or activities that would have happened without the additional incentive provide by the carbon credit. So the carbon credit issue now, when it comes to the small grant for entrepreneurs, it is very hard for us to start, you know, checking the indicators and everything, because when you submit your report or you submit a project proposal for this such grant, we don't even, there's no even funding to come and, you know, to come and follow up with what is happening on grant, or how you're actually measuring or calculating all those stuff. So for me, I think one of the way forward on the issue of assessing this fund or grant is for us to start looking at how can we make sure that we work in line to make sure that there is a collaboration between the so-called entrepreneur to come up with some sort of statement or press release to show the government that they can also add value into, because every business wants to do this carbon credit, like what my sister mentioned. Small businesses are also tapping into this opportunity. But how can we make sure that Africa, we can make carbon credit or carbon finance work for Africa or Nigeria as a country? So I think it is a continuous conversation, because if we don't look at that, so what comes to a very important entrepreneur that is doing fantastic work around energy, and we see the proposal or the call for the funding opportunity very interesting. But in the internal selection, there's also another political conversation or political will that will not make that person to even actually tap into it and use it for their own. So there should be a gathering of private sector, gathering of entrepreneurs to start looking at how can we do it more better and make government to understand that we are also a big player in this conversation, so that the issue of reducing emission by 2063, or that the government is talking about, will be able to, achieved. But because if you don't do that, I can tell you from my experience for the past 3 years now that private sector is really contributing a lot, or let me say can contribute a lot. Both the entrepreneur, private sector, and different businesses can really contribute a lot in, building this idea of carbon credit or carbon. And let me end by saying there is what we call the low emission, I think LTE or something like that, that is also going on presently. Nigerian government have been on this thing for the past 3 years. I just want to understand, what are we still waiting for that we've not come up with even a pager or concept on how we want our local the LTE emission? I've forgotten the name they call it. And I remember the consultancy that is working on it. It goes back and forth. There's a time it came to us that they need funding, but we cannot give that funding at that moment because we are only focusing on non-governmental organizations. But now that we are now looking at, businesses, I think it's an opportunity for everybody on this call that is into business that is supporting the environment to start looking at such grants to, to leverage on. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much, Olumide. It was a two-pronged question, but you managed to answer the two questions with just one of the questions. So that's quite insightful. So there are opportunities for grants to be accessed, but we need to drive more conversation by everybody pulling together, both the startups, the entrepreneurs, and businesses within the Cleantech ecosystem. Okay. Thank you so much, Olumide. And that brings me to the last question that I have here before we throw the mic to the audience. And the question is for Rotimi. How do we expect to see the carbon market evolve in the next 5 years? How do we expect to see the carbon market evolve in the next 5 years?
That's the carbon markets in Nigeria or in general?
In Nigeria and in general.
Okay, yeah, I think that we'll see, there was actually a startup that was here, someone that posted something called Carbon X here, for example. I think we'll see more companies like that emerge in Nigeria and in the region. So I just looked at his website, or I'm not sure if it was her, but I mean, basically these companies that help private companies create emissions inventory management systems and essentially carbon accounting, and that kind of becomes a basis for which you can then start to engage verification programs and start your certification process of like the work that the avoidance projects that you're doing or the reduction projects that you're doing, getting certified for credits that can then be used in these various markets, whether it's local markets, whether it's international. And we know that some of the biggest venture capital flows globally, at least from what I was reading last year, were pouring into climate accounting and climate-related, climate accounting tangential business models. So they're big ones now globally. These guys are tapping into revenue opportunities with big multinationals and conglomerates in institutions, NGOs, etc., that need to track their massive footprints and self-report, and then set themselves up to be able to then work with verification standards and so I think something that will definitely evolve is you'll probably see a lot more startups that rise to that occasion to track that. And maybe there'll be a handful of them working with the majors in Nigeria. It seems like a good opportunity. You'll see a lot of them going a step further of providing full suite of services, enabling you to connect directly into these markets and trade and provide your service accordingly. So once again, maybe what Carbon Limits is doing as a formal consulting entity might be democratized for even smaller projects, because they will typically work with projects of certain scale and so on and so forth. So I think you'll see a democratization of potentially accessing the carbon markets. I know already from an entity called Odyssey, we heard about a scheme that was kind of going on globally, in which in other countries, so it was in Asia and other parts of the world, and they're thinking about bringing it to Nigeria for people that have solar projects that are running. Obviously, you're switching off the generator or you're turning it off, so it's very directly measurable. So things like that are definitely already circulating, and there are lots of companies that can help you queue into the market. I do hope to see, just building on what Monica said, I do hope to see a national inventory management system. I think when I spoke about it, I feel like, yep, there probably are some inventory management things going on, but I don't know who's tracking every household and every business that is spewing out that nasty stuff coming out the back of your generator. It should be just like when you register a car in the US or wherever the case may be, you should go and register your generator. And they should certify whether your generator is fit for purpose to get out there, right? Like, you should meet a certain emission standard. So maybe that might be interesting, right? To see companies come up and virtually tag generators, trucks, and so on and so forth. A lot of things that should not be on the road or should not be out there, they just shouldn't be allowed. And if you do it, you should be fined. You should be charged for using these fossil fuel engines and so on and so forth that produce a certain amount of emissions. So I think some of those things will emerge. Hopefully the law and the vision once again converge. It's a 5-year carbon budget. So I think we should definitely all research that and understand it better. I have a long way to go to understand it myself. So I think there'll be a convergence of the law and the vision as well. And hopefully a large driver of that will be multinationals that are operating in the space that are being forced to comply with global regulations.
All right. Thank you very much, Rotimi. I mean, just hearing what to expect in the market and our current realities, I mean, we have such a wide gap to fill in the next 5 years if we're going to be able to measure up to the global standard of the market in the next 5 years. Okay, thank you once again, Rotimi. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. This has actually been one of the most insightful discussions I've heard on carbon credits. The question I've got, I think Rotimi mentioned it towards the tail end of his response to the question he was answering. And that question is, the private sector today in Nigeria, I mean, the main emitters, there's the oil and gas companies, cement companies, manufacturers. From anyone's experience working with them to sell carbon offsets, for example, what has been their level of acceptance? I know that the government is usually the last to really come on board, but how open already is the private sector in Nigeria to offtake some of the carbon credits that will be generated by some of the projects that are coming up in Nigeria? That's my question.
I can jump in and just respond there. So Nancy, nice. Hopefully I'm speaking to the right person, right? It's Nancy. Okay. So yeah, just to pick up on something that I pointed out earlier on. Yeah, there's because the person that I'm sort of related to, or know him as a mentor, Mr. Abete, is part of an entity called Carbon Limits, and once again, that is it's a full service consulting entity that helps Nigerian companies or entities that are operating out of here and also into the rest of the world as well. Get their projects set up for carbon trading, or at least queuing into carbon credits. And I'll post the website here. Hopefully it's the right one. But they deal with the likes of, somehow my name is showing up as AJ, which is funny, but they deal with the likes of the multinationals, right? So if you go to their website and you kind of scroll down there to the bottom, you'll see the types of companies that they're interacting with. Shells. If you think about your indigenous oil and gas companies now, for example, those that have gas, wells that they're flaring, a lot of them are like trying to work with Carbon Limits as an example, because it's the corollary is carbon finance, right? So another way of funding your project in a market in which interest rates are increasing rapidly, it's very difficult to, especially for all these gas providers now, the market for financing is sort of drying up. I think it might return a little bit just as the world is kind of starting to stabilize coming out of the Ukraine situation. But they are tapping into these sources to help pay for parts of their projects and therefore reduce their cost of capital. So I think as long as that is an incentive, i.e. what people say as always free money on the table, the capitalists will always go for that. So I do think that there's a willingness and there's an incentive as well to make corporations that are profits oriented to comply. You'll see this from the cement companies, you'll see this from the gas companies, the oil and gas companies as well. Hopefully we start to see it in more of the building sectors. A lot of solar companies are also starting to try and gear up. It's just that I heard the price for the credits wasn't as high for solar type projects as it was for something like gas flaring. So there's a bit of a price discrepancy which has to be addressed there, but I do think that there's a strong willingness because there is money on the table, but you need to work with the right partners to be able to tap into it. So if you research Carbon Limits, I'm sure that you'll see they have already penetrated a lot of the majors that you'll be familiar with, and they're probably already doing business with them. Any indigenous oil and gas companies probably potentially already heard of them and working with them. The majors probably are, and also your other nationals like Unilever, so on and so forth. They all have to comply with these things. So they're probably already doing business there. Hopefully that gives an answer.
Yes, you actually answered it spot on. Thank you so much.
All right.